Everyone thinks they know how this story starts. Prince Harry walks away. The palace shrugs. Life goes on. But what if that's not what really happened? What if Harry didn't leave on his own terms at all? But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. Here's the uncomfortable question no one wants to ask out loud. Do princes actually get to quit, or do they get removed? Because behind the polite statements, the carefully worded press releases, and the endless debates about stepping back, something far more severe was unfolding. Something quiet, calculated, and irreversible. This isn't just a story about a royal title. It's a story about power slipping from one generation to the next, about a father who waited too long, about a brother who waited patiently, and about a son who may not have realized the ground beneath him was already gone. Think about it. Titles in the monarchy aren't just honorifics. They're shields. They grant access, protection, leverage. Lose the title, and suddenly doors don't just close. They were never meant to open again. So when whispers began circulating that Prince Harry was being stripped rather than stepping back, it raised a chilling possibility. This wasn't rebellion. This was discipline. And then there's the timing. Why now? Why does this moment coincide with King Charles quietly stepping aside from the day-to-day reigns? Why does it align with Prince William suddenly appearing everywhere that matters? Meetings, briefings, symbolic appearances that scream authority without ever saying the word king. This is where the story gets uncomfortable. Because monarchies don't collapse with explosions. They survive with silence. They make decisions in rooms without windows, and they announce them long after the damage is done. Ask yourself this. If Harry truly chose freedom, why does everything about his position look weaker, not stronger? Why does he speak more, yet control less? Why does the institution seem relieved? There's a contradiction here. A dangerous one. On the surface, Harry is louder than ever. Interviews, projects, statements. But power doesn't shout. Power withdraws access. Power lets you talk while it quietly removes your relevance. And what about King Charles? For decades, he waited, watched, endured. A lifetime as the heir who would never quite arrive. Now imagine finally holding the crown and realizing you may not have the strength, time, or public patience to fight every battle yourself. What do you do then? You delegate. You prepare your successor. And you clean house. Because here's the truth few want to admit. Institutions don't bend for individuals. Not even for sons. Especially not when the future king is already standing in the doorway, watching, learning, waiting for the moment he's allowed to act. And that moment came faster than anyone expected. Because before Harry could fully understand what was happening, the rules changed. The language shifted. And the palace stopped negotiating. But what happened behind closed doors, the moment the throne quietly changed hands, would set off a chain reaction no one could reverse. And that's where the real story begins. Here's the part most people missed. King Charles didn't announce a handover of power. He didn't stand at a podium and say the words everyone expected. No abdication. No dramatic farewell. No historic broadcast. And that's exactly why it worked. Because real power doesn't need ceremony. It moves quietly. While the public was distracted by headlines about Harry, lawsuits, documentaries, and family drama, something else was happening inside the palace. Meetings without cameras. Briefings without transcripts. Decisions framed as temporary that somehow never reversed. Ask yourself this. When was the last time you saw King Charles acting like a man preparing for a long reign? Now compare that to Prince William. Suddenly, William was everywhere, representing the crown, speaking on matters that once belonged to the monarch alone, sitting in rooms where the future, not the present, was being discussed. And no one corrected it. No one denied it. No one slowed it down. That's not coincidence. That's choreography. This is how monarchies survive moments of weakness. They don't wait for collapse. They transition before anyone can call it that. Charles didn't step aside publicly. He shifted authority privately. And in doing so, he changed the balance of the entire family. Here's where it gets uncomfortable. When power transfers quietly, it also transfers priorities. And William's priorities were never the same as Harry's. William is institution first. Always has been. The crown above the self. Stability over emotion. Control over chaos. Harry, on the other hand, became unpredictability personified. Every interview another spark. Every project another variable. Every emotional confession another reminder that the family's internal wounds were now public property. That kind of exposure terrifies institutions. So when William began assuming more control, the question inside palace walls wasn't, how do we protect Harry? It was, how do we contain the damage? And that's where the language changed. Not reconciliation. Management. Not healing. Risk assessment. Not family. Structure. Charles may have still worn the crown, but William was already shaping the rules. And once that happens, personal relationships stop matching the way people expect them to. Decisions become colder, cleaner, final. Think about it. If you're preparing to inherit an institution that survived for 1,000 years, would you allow one member, even your brother, to destabilize it on the global stage? Or would you do what future kings have always done? You remove the problem quietly and let the public believe it was voluntary. This is why Harry's position didn't just weaken overnight. It eroded. Privileges disappeared without announcement. Invitations stopped coming. Silence replaced negotiation. And the most telling sign of all, no one rushed to stop it. Because once William's authority became normalized, the outcome was no longer a debate. It was a process. And processes don't feel personal, even when they destroy personal bonds. But the true shock wasn't the power shift itself. It was what William chose to do with that power the moment he no longer needed permission. Because the next move wasn't symbolic. It was surgical. And it centered on one thing Harry thought could never be taken from him. His title. And once that decision was set in motion, there was no turning back. Here's the line the palace never wanted crossed. There's a massive difference between stepping back and being stripped away. One sounds voluntary. The other is a verdict. And the moment Prince Harry's title entered internal discussions, this stopped being about feelings and started being about authority. Because titles in the royal system aren't emotional tokens. They're legal instruments. They define rank, access, and legitimacy. Remove one, and you don't just embarrass someone, you neutralize them. Ask yourself this. If Harry truly walked away freely, why did the palace need contingency plans? Why were there legal reviews? Why were advisors suddenly debating precedent instead of reconciliation? That contradiction tells you everything. Behind closed doors, the narrative wasn't Harry wants out. It was what happens if he stays connected. Every monarchy fears one thing above all else: loss of control. And Harry, whether intentionally or not, had become uncontrollable. His words couldn't be managed. His projects couldn't be filtered. His grievances couldn't be predicted. That makes him dangerous. Not emotionally, but structurally. So the conversation shifted. Not should we support him, but how far does his status extend? This is where it gets chilling. Because stripping a royal title isn't done impulsively. It requires justification, documentation, a chain of approvals that ensures the decision looks clean when history looks back. Which means this wasn't a reaction. It was preparation. Harry didn't wake up one day and lose relevance. The groundwork was laid quietly, piece by piece. Reduced roles, symbolic exclusions, language changes in official correspondence. Small adjustments no one outside the system would notice, but insiders understood immediately. And here's the part most people misunderstand. This wasn't about punishment. It was about containment. As long as Harry carried the weight of a royal title, every word he spoke echoed back to the institution. Every accusation reflected on the crown. Every emotional confession became a liability. Removing the title didn't silence him, it disconnected him. Once that cord was cut, the palace could finally say, without saying it at all, he speaks for himself now. And where was King Charles in all this? Present, aware, but no longer leading the charge. This is the uncomfortable reality. By the time the title question reached its final phase, the decision-making gravity had already shifted. William's influence wasn't theoretical anymore, it was operational. And operations don't ask for sentiment. They ask for outcomes. Harry may have believed blood would protect him. That family would slow the machine. But institutions don't recognize loyalty the way individuals do. They recognize risk. And the most brutal part? Once the process began, it didn't matter what Harry said next. The outcome no longer depended on him. The title wasn't lost in a moment of anger. It was removed in a moment of clarity. And when Harry finally realized what was happening, the silence from the palace told him everything he needed to know. But what he didn't realize What no one outside those walls knew yet was that the title was only the first step, because once it was gone, something far more devastating followed. Something that would change how Harry saw his place in the world forever. Here's the part that hurts the most, and the part no one really talks about. When Prince Harry lost the title, he didn't just lose a word in front of his name. He lost the invisible safety net that had followed him since birth. The kind you don't notice until it's gone. The kind that quietly smooths problems away before they ever reach you. The kind that lets mistakes stay private. That protection vanished the moment the palace stopped claiming him. Think back to the opening question. Did Harry walk away, or was he removed? By the end of this story, the answer feels uncomfortably clear. Because if this were simply a son choosing freedom, the crown wouldn't have needed to distance itself so thoroughly. There wouldn't have been silence where there once was mediation. There wouldn't have been a sudden coldness where warmth used to exist. And there certainly wouldn't have been such a clean, almost clinical separation. That's not how families behave. That's how institutions survive. King Charles may still wear the crown in public, but the reality behind the scenes is far more sobering. The moment he allowed authority to shift to William, he allowed the future king to make decisions based not on memory, but on necessity. William didn't grow up dreaming of escape. He grew up preparing for endurance. And endurance demands sacrifice. Harry became that sacrifice. The irony is brutal. In trying to define himself outside the monarchy, Harry may have underestimated just how much of his power came from it. He found his voice, but lost his leverage. He gained attention, but lost influence. He spoke his truth, but surrendered the platform that once made it untouchable. So ask yourself this. Was Harry reckless, or was he simply unaware of how unforgiving the system truly is? And what does it say about the monarchy that blood wasn't enough to save him? This isn't a fairy tale. It's a warning. The crown does not bend for emotion. It absorbs it, waits it out, and moves on. The machine keeps turning, even when it has to grind down its own. But here's the part that should make you pause. Harry's story isn't finished. Because a prince without a title isn't powerless. He's unpredictable, untethered, free from the rules that once restrained him, but also exposed to consequences he's never had to face alone. And history shows us something chilling. The most dangerous people aren't the ones inside the system. They're the ones who've been cast out of it and still know how it works. So the real question isn't whether Prince Harry lost his title. The real question is what he becomes now that he has nothing left to lose. Because when someone who once stood at the center of power is pushed completely to the edge, what comes next isn't reconciliation. It's reckoning. And what comes after that may shake the monarchy far more than anyone is ready for.